It was supposed to be just another weekend adventure. The four of us, Tommy, Jake, Ricky, and me, Alex, had been exploring the woods around our small town since we were old enough to ride bikes without training wheels. Every Friday after school, we'd pack up our gear and head out, looking for new places to discover. This time, though, we wanted to push our limits. We'd heard rumors about a cave deep in the woods, a place where no one dared to go, a place that had swallowed people whole. We didn't believe the stories. To us, they were just old wives' tales meant to keep kids like us out of trouble. But we weren't like other kids. We craved adventure, and the thought of exploring a cave that no one had ever fully mapped out was too tempting to resist. So we decided to go. We met early Saturday morning, just as the sun was rising. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of wet earth filled my nostrils as we trudged through the underbrush. Tommy, the oldest and our unofficial leader, carried the map we'd cobbled together from various sources, half from the internet, half from hearsay. Jake, always the most prepared, had his backpack filled with supplies, flashlights, rope, snacks, and water. Ricky was our comic relief, always cracking jokes to lighten the mood, while I brought up the rear, keeping a steady pace and trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. The trek took longer than we expected. The deeper we went into the woods, the more it felt like we were stepping into another world. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining overhead until the sky was barely visible. By the time we reached the cave's entrance, the sun was already starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out toward us like fingers. "This is it," Tommy said, holding up the map. "The Cave of Shadows." "Great name," Ricky snorted. But there was an edge to his voice that told me he was just as nervous as I was. We stood there for a moment, staring into the gaping mouth of the cave. It was dark, darker than I'd imagined. The air around it was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the warmth of the forest. "Well, are we going in or not?" Jake asked, trying to sound braver than he felt. Tommy nodded. "Let's do it." The first thing that hit me as we entered the cave was the smell, damp, musty, with an underlying stench that I couldn't quite place. It reminded me of something rotten, something that had been left to decay in the dark. We flicked on our flashlights, the beams cutting through the thick darkness like knives. The walls of the cave were slick with moisture, and the floor was uneven, forcing us to watch our step. The deeper we went, the more the air seemed to press in around us, like the cave itself was closing in. "Anyone else getting the creeps?" Ricky asked, his voice echoing off the walls. "Don't be a wuss," Tommy shot back, but his voice wavered slightly. "It's just a cave. We'll be fine." We pressed on, our footsteps the only sound in the oppressive silence. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the earth. Every so often, we'd come across a narrow passage that forced us to squeeze through sideways, or a drop that required us to use the rope to descend. It was slow going, but none of us wanted to turn back. After what felt like hours, we came to a large chamber. The ceiling rose high above us, disappearing into the darkness. Stalactites hung from the roof like jagged teeth, and the floor was covered in a shallow pool of water. In the center of the chamber was a large rock formation that looked almost like an altar. "This is it," Tommy said, his voice hushed. "The heart of the cave." "Creepy," Jake muttered, scanning the walls with his flashlight. "Look at this," Ricky called out, his voice echoing in the chamber. He was standing by the altar, his flashlight illuminating something carved into the stone. It was a series of symbols, strange and ancient, that none of us recognized. "What do you think it means?" I asked, stepping closer. "Who cares?" Tommy replied. "It's probably just some old graffiti. Let's keep moving." But as we turned to leave, the ground beneath us shook. It was a low, rumbling sound, like the earth itself was groaning in pain. The water rippled, and a few loose rocks tumbled from the ceiling. "Did you feel that?" Jake asked, his eyes wide. "Yeah," Tommy said, his voice tight. "We need to get out of here. Now." We started back the way we came, but the tunnel seemed different, narrower, more twisted. The air was heavier, harder to breathe. Panic set in as we realized that we were lost. The cave was changing, shifting around us like it was alive. "Where's the way out?" Ricky shouted, his voice rising in fear. "I don't know," Tommy snapped, his composure slipping. "Just keep moving." We stumbled through the darkness, our flashlights flickering as if the batteries were dying. The walls seemed to close in on us, the air thick with the scent of decay. I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on us, and for the first time, I truly believed that the cave was alive, that it was hungry. Suddenly, Ricky let out a scream. We turned just in time to see him disappear into the floor. The ground had opened up beneath him, swallowing him whole. His flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam still shining uselessly into the darkness. "Ricky!" Jake shouted, rushing to the edge of the hole. But it was too late. The hole had already sealed itself, leaving no trace that Ricky had ever been there. "Oh my God," Jake whispered, backing away. "Oh my God." "We have to keep moving," Tommy said, though his voice was shaking. "We can't help him now." But I couldn't move. My legs were frozen, my mind racing. Ricky was gone, just like that. The cave had taken him. "Alex, come on." Tommy grabbed my arm, pulling me forward. "We have to go." Reluctantly, I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about Ricky, about how he'd just vanished, as if he'd never existed. But there was no time to mourn. The cave was still shifting, still trying to trap us. We continued through the twisting tunnels, the sense of dread growing with every step. The walls seemed to pulse like the cave was breathing. I could feel it watching us, waiting for its next victim. We came to a narrow passage, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through one at a time. Tommy went first, followed by Jake, then me. The passage was so tight that I had to turn sideways, my back scraping against the rough stone. Halfway through, Jake screamed. "Jake, what's wrong?" I shouted, but he didn't respond. I could hear him struggling, thrashing against something. Then there was a horrible crunching sound followed by silence. "Jake!" I called out again, my voice trembling. There was no answer. Tommy was ahead of us, already out of the passage. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with panic. "I don't know," I said, my throat dry. He just stopped." I squeezed through the rest of the passage as quickly as I could, my heart racing. When I emerged on the other side, I saw what had happened. Jake was gone, pulled into the wall itself. All that was left was his flashlight, lying on the ground, its beam flickering weakly. "No," Tommy whispered, staring at the spot where Jake had disappeared. "This can't be happening. This isn't real." But it was real. The cave was picking us off one by one, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Tommy and I were the only ones left. The cave had taken Ricky and Jake, and I knew it wouldn't be satisfied until it had all of us. We kept moving, but it was no use. The cave was toying with us, leading us deeper and deeper into its twisted heart. We came to another chamber, smaller than the first but just as eerie. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen earlier, but this time they seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. "We have to get out of here," Tommy said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We have to find a way out." But there was no way out. The tunnel we'd come through had vanished, leaving us trapped. I could feel the cave closing in, tightening its grip. Then, without warning, the ground beneath Tommy crumbled. He tried to jump back, but the floor gave way too quickly. I reached out, grabbing his hand just as he started to fall, but the cave was stronger. It pulled him down, dragging him into the darkness. "Alex, don't let go!" Tommy screamed, his eyes wide with terror. "I won't!" I shouted, pulling with all my strength. But it was no use. The cave was too strong. It was like trying to pull someone out of quicksand. "I'm sorry," Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." Then he was gone, swallowed by the cave like the others. I was alone. The cave had taken my friends, leaving me to face it on my own. I didn't know what to do. Every tunnel, every chamber looked the same, and there was no way to tell which way led to safety and which way led to death. But I had to keep moving. I couldn't let the cave win. I couldn't let it take me too. I don't know how long I wandered through the tunnels. Time seemed to lose all meaning. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind frayed. But I kept going, driven by some primal instinct to survive. Finally, I saw a faint light up ahead. I stumbled toward it, my heart pounding. As I got closer, the light grew brighter until I could see the outline of the cave's entrance. I was almost out, but the cave wasn't done with me yet. The ground shook violently, rocks tumbling from the ceiling. The tunnels started to collapse, the walls closing in around me. I ran, adrenaline surging through me. The light was just ahead, so close I could almost touch it. The cave roared, a deep guttural sound that filled me with dread. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Just as the tunnel collapsed behind me, I burst out of the cave and into the open air. I stumbled and fell, gasping for breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. I was alive, but my friends were gone. The cave had taken them, leaving me to tell their story. I looked back at the entrance, now buried under a pile of rubble. The cave was hidden once more, its secrets buried with it. I knew I could never go back. The cave had won, but at least I had survived. I was the last one standing.